There was a winter evening many years ago when I sat across from a man who had built an empire out of steel and silence. Andrew Carnegie leaned forward in his chair, his eyes fixed on mine with that quiet intensity that made lesser men shrink, and he asked me a question that would alter the direction of my entire existence. He asked whether I believed that the difference between the men who ruled their lives and the men who were ruled by circumstance could be reduced to a single principle. I hesitated, for I was young then, and I had not yet learned that the deepest truths are almost always the simplest ones. He did not wait for my answer. He said, with the weight of a man who had tested every theory against the hard stone of reality, that the master of his own life is first and foremost the master of his own mind. I have spent the better part of half a century testing that statement against the lives of 500 of the most successful men and women this world has ever produced. I have walked through the private studies of Edison. I have broken bread with Ford. I have listened to Rockefeller speak of his early failures in a voice still trembling with the memory of them. And I tell you now, in the stillness of this room, that Carnegie was right. Whatever the mind can conceive and believe, it can achieve. But the mind that has not been disciplined cannot conceive clearly, and the mind that cannot conceive clearly cannot believe deeply. Everything begins and everything ends with the cultivation of that invisible kingdom that lies behind your eyes. Consider the strange condition of the modern man. He wakes before he is ready, his hand reaching for a glowing rectangle before his feet have touched the floor. He consumes 1,000 fragments of other men's thoughts before he has composed a single thought of his own. He moves through his day like a leaf carried by conflicting winds, believing himself to be free, when in truth he has surrendered the governance of his inner world to every passing impulse, every flickering screen, every whisper of fear and envy that drifts through the crowd. He calls this existence a life, and he wonders in the quiet hours before sleep why he feels so tired, so scattered, so inexplicably poor in a world that has made him richer in possessions than any king of the old world ever dreamed of being. But the most surprising part comes only now. The poverty he feels is not a poverty of circumstance. It is a poverty of order. It is the poverty of a mind that has never been taught to discipline itself, and of a life that has never been consciously arranged around a definite purpose. This is the great secret that the masters of fortune have always understood, though they have rarely stated it plainly. The outer world is nothing but the faithful reflection of the inner world. Rearrange the kingdom within, and the kingdom without will reorganize itself in obedience. I learned this lesson slowly, and I learned it at great cost. In my early years, I wrote with passion and I spoke with conviction, but my days were a chaos of half-finished manuscripts, scattered appointments, and ambitions that contradicted one another from morning to evening. I wanted wealth, but I also wanted leisure. I wanted recognition, but I also wanted solitude. I was, in short, a house divided against itself, and the foundations of such a house will always crack beneath the first storm. It was during one of those storms, when my work had collapsed and my hopes had withered, that I sat down at a wooden desk in a small rented room and did the thing I had been avoiding for a decade. I took a sheet of paper and I wrote at the top of it, in careful letters, my definite major purpose. Not my wish, not my dream. Not my vague inclination, my purpose. The one aim around which every other aim in my life would be subordinated, the one goal toward which every hour would be marshaled, the one thought that would be permitted to occupy the throne of my conscious mind. That single act, simple as it appeared, marked the beginning of everything that would follow. Until a man has defined his purpose, he cannot discipline his mind, because discipline without direction is merely another form of torment. But once the purpose is fixed, the mind becomes a hammer, and every thought, every hour, every conversation becomes a blow struck upon the anvil of that definite aim. The scattered man gathers himself. The divided house unifies. The leaf in the wind becomes the arrow in flight. What Hill recognized in those long years of research was something deeply unsettling. He observed that the masses of men were not failing for lack of ability. They were not failing for lack of opportunity. They were not even failing for lack of effort, for some of them worked themselves to exhaustion in pursuit of nothing in particular. They were failing because they had never been taught that the mind, like a garden, produces abundantly whatever is planted in it, and that if no definite seed is planted, the wild weeds of fear, doubt, and imitation will take the soil for themselves and choke out every possibility of a worthy harvest. Marcus Aurelius, who ruled the known world from the back of a horse in distant provinces, kept a small private notebook in which he reminded himself again and again that the mind must be disciplined like a soldier, trained like an athlete, watched like a treasury. He wrote not for the public, but for himself, because he knew that the emperor of Rome could not afford to be the slave of his own uncontrolled thoughts. I put this question to you, who are not emperors of any province, but who are, whether you know it or not, the sovereign of the single most important territory you will ever rule. If the ruler of the ancient world considered mental discipline the first duty of his station, what possible excuse remains for the modern man who governs nothing and yet cannot govern himself? Edison once said something to me that I have never forgotten. He said that most men missed opportunity because it came dressed in overalls and looked like work. But he added, in that dry way of his, that even the men who recognized opportunity often lost it because they had never built the inner organization required to hold it. A disorganized mind, he said, is like a broken jar. You may pour gold into it, but the gold will run out through the cracks before you can count it. The first task is not the acquisition of wealth, nor the pursuit of position. The first task is the sealing of the jar. The first task is the ordering of the inner life. Here we arrive at one of the deepest paradoxes in the philosophy of achievement. Men believe that freedom is the absence of discipline, and they spend their lives avoiding the structures that might liberate them. But observe this carefully, for the detail that most people overlook is hidden right here. The undisciplined mind is not free. It is enslaved by every passing stimulus, every fear, every appetite, every voice from the crowd. True freedom is not the absence of order. True freedom is the presence of an order so deeply rooted in your own being that no outer force can disturb it. There was a practice that I began in those difficult years, and that I continued without interruption for nearly 50 years. Each evening, before the day closed, I sat alone with a notebook, and I reviewed the hours that had just passed, not to punish myself, for punishment is the tool of a weak and frightened mind, but to examine with the calm eye of a gardener surveying his rows, which thoughts had flourished, which thoughts had strayed, which hours had been aligned with my definite purpose, and which hours had been squandered upon matters that belonged to no man's life at all. This practice did more to reshape my inner world than any book I ever read. You must understand that the subconscious mind is not a passive thing. It is the most powerful force in the universe of your experience, and it works ceaselessly to manifest whatever is impressed upon it with feeling and repetition. If you impress upon it the image of a scattered life, it will produce for you a scattered life. If you impress upon it, through autosuggestion, the image of a disciplined mind moving steadily toward a definite aim, it will begin, slowly at first, and then with accelerating power, to organize the outer circumstances of your life in harmony with that image. But what Hill said about this subject was deeply unsettling, and I will tell it to you without softening. The same law that brings fortune to the disciplined mind brings misfortune to the undisciplined one. The subconscious does not distinguish between what you want and what you fear. It simply manifests what you dwell upon. The man who rehearses his anxieties every morning while he shaves is casting spells upon his own future as surely as any sorcerer of the old tales. He is ordering from the infinite storehouse precisely the conditions he most dreads, and he will receive them with such punctuality that he will be tempted to call it fate. But it was not fate. It was the faithful execution of an order placed each morning by a mind that had never been taught to discipline its own thoughts. Consider Abraham Lincoln. He lost his mother when he was 9. He lost his business partner. He lost his sweetheart. He lost election after election. He endured depression so deep that his friends feared he might take his own life. And yet within the broken cabin of that man's inner world, there burned a single unwavering flame, a definite purpose that no outer failure could extinguish. He disciplined his mind not through the absence of suffering, but through the organization of his response to suffering. He ordered his days. He read by firelight. He walked miles for books. He composed his thoughts with the slow patience of a man building a cathedral stone by stone. And when the hour arrived that the nation required a soul large enough to hold it together, that soul was ready because for 30 years in silence and in sorrow, he had been disciplining the kingdom within. Here begins the darkest game of the subconscious mind. Most men do not lack the capacity for greatness. They lack the willingness to pay the price of small, daily, unglamorous order. They will dream of mountains, but they will not climb the single stair before them. They will speak of transformation, but they will not rise 15 minutes earlier. They will announce their grand ambitions to anyone who will listen, but they will not sit alone for half an hour and write down in their own hand the definite steps that lead from where they stand to where they say they wish to go. And so their dreams remain dreams, and they die many years later with the bitter taste of unlived possibility upon their lips, blaming luck and circumstance for a defeat that was arranged day by undisciplined day inside their own unordered minds. There is something you must grasp about the nature of thought itself. Every thought you entertain is a vibration, and every vibration has a tendency to attract its kind. When you allow your mind to drift through fear, you are broadcasting upon the invisible medium of thought a signal that will be answered by the conditions, the people, and the opportunities that correspond to fear. When you discipline your mind to dwell upon your definite major purpose with faith and with feeling, you broadcast a signal of an entirely different frequency, and you will be astonished at the speed with which the universe begins to arrange its coincidences in your favor. The real turning point begins here. The moment a man decides with the full force of his will that he will no longer allow his mind to be the playground of every passing impulse, that moment is the birthday of his true life. Everything that came before was preparation or wandering or waste. Everything that comes after is construction. And the materials of that construction are the simple, humble, daily practices that most men disdain because they appear too small to produce so great a transformation. The early rising, the quiet hour of planning, the written purpose reviewed each morning, the autosuggestion spoken aloud with conviction, the evening examination, the careful guarding of the company one keeps. What the lives of great achievers have been trying to tell us for centuries is this: they did not succeed because they were extraordinary men. They became extraordinary men because they succeeded, first, in the inner battle that most of their contemporaries refused to fight. Ford was not born with a disciplined mind. He built one in the long nights of his young manhood, when he tinkered by lamplight while other men slept. Rockefeller was not born with a disciplined mind. He built one penny by penny, ledger by ledger, in the clerk's chair where he trained himself to account for every cent of his life before any cent of his fortune appeared. You are not different from these men in any essential way. You have the same mind, the same will, the same access to the infinite intelligence that organizes the cosmos itself. What you lack is not capacity. What you lack is structure, and structure is not something that descends from heaven upon the worthy. Structure is something that you build slowly, deliberately, imperfectly over the course of days and weeks and years, until one morning you wake and discover that the scattered and tired man who could not hold a thought for 5 minutes without reaching for a distraction has quietly died in the night, and in his place stands a new man whose mind moves with the steady power of a river that has finally found its banks. Let us speak plainly about the practice itself. Each morning, before the noise of the world has been permitted to enter your ears, take 15 minutes in a quiet room with nothing but a pen and a notebook. Write your definite major purpose at the top of the page. Write it even if you have written it 1,000 times before. The repetition is not redundancy. It is the hammer that drives the nail of your purpose deeper into the subconscious with every stroke. Beneath it, write the 3 most important actions you will take that day in service of that purpose, not 10. Not 20. 3, the undisciplined mind believes that more is better, while the disciplined mind knows that focused is better. Then close the notebook and do the first action before you do anything else, before you read the news, before you answer a message, before you explain yourself to anyone. Do the work that matters in the hour when your mind is clearest, and protect that hour as a king protects his treasury, because it is, in fact, the treasury from which every other hour of your day will draw its wealth. The man who gives away his first hour to the demands of other men has sold his life for a price so small that it cannot even be counted. Throughout the day, when you notice that your mind has wandered from its course, do not berate yourself. Self-criticism is a luxury of the weak. The disciplined man does not waste energy on regret. He simply notices the drift, and he returns. He notices the drift, and he returns. 1,000 times a day, if necessary. The discipline of the mind is not the absence of wandering. It is the unshakable habit of return. Every time you return, you strengthen the habit. Every time you return, you cast one more vote for the man you are becoming. In the evening, before sleep, take another 15 minutes. Review the day. Not to judge it, but to understand it. Which hours were aligned with your purpose? Which thoughts served you? Which thoughts stole from you? And before you close the notebook, impress upon your subconscious mind, with the calm confidence of a man who knows the law he is invoking, the image of the next day lived in harmony with your definite purpose. Then sleep. And while you sleep, the deeper intelligence within you, which never tires and never forgets, will work upon the image you have planted and will prepare, in ways you cannot trace, the opportunities and insights that tomorrow will bring. There is a paradox at the heart of all this that I must place before you. Discipline, in its highest form, is not rigidity. It is not the clenched jaw of the man who forces himself through a joyless program. It is the quiet freedom of the man who has so thoroughly ordered his inner world that he can move through the outer world with grace and responsiveness, meeting each moment as it arrives, without panic and without resistance. The truly disciplined mind is the most flexible mind, because it is not shaken by surprises, not threatened by change, not wounded by opposition. It stands upon a foundation so deep that the storms of the surface cannot reach the stillness of its core. The modern age conspires against this inheritance. It trains you from childhood to seek approval outside yourself. It rewards you for reactions rather than responses. It fills every silence with noise, lest you should discover in the quiet the voice of your own deeper knowing. Modern man has lost the compass of his inner purpose, but not the need for it, and the pain he feels, the anxiety that wakes him at 3 a.m, the restlessness that sends him scrolling through the infinite scroll of other men's lives, is nothing but the need of the unhonored compass, turning still despite all neglect toward the true north of a purpose he has not yet defined. And so I return, as I always return, to the question that stands at the threshold of every transformation. What is your definite major purpose? Not your wish, not your daydream, not the thing you say when polite strangers ask you what you do. Your purpose, the one aim, clearly defined, specifically stated, emotionally felt, around which you will organize every remaining hour of your life. Until you can answer that question with a clarity that would satisfy the most skeptical questioner, no amount of discipline will save you, because discipline without direction is merely the careful arrangement of a journey to nowhere. But once that question is answered, everything else becomes possible. The hours organize themselves, the habits arrange themselves, the temptations lose their grip, not because you have become stronger than them, but because you have become larger than them. A man with a great purpose cannot be long distracted by small pleasures, any more than a river on its way to the sea can be long detained by a puddle upon its banks. I have watched this happen too many times to doubt it. I have watched men who seemed born to failure become, within 5 years of adopting these principles, masters of domains they had once not even dared to enter. And I have watched, with a sorrow that I will not pretend to conceal, those who heard these truths and did not apply them. They nodded. They underlined the passages in their books. And they continued the next morning to surrender their first hour to the demands of their devices, to leave their purposes undefined. Knowledge without application is not knowledge. It is decoration. Do not be that man. Do not be the well-read, well-spoken, well-decorated failure. Be the one who closes the book, takes up the pen, writes the purpose, keeps the schedule, guards the hour, reviews the day, and slowly, imperceptibly, in the manner of all true transformations, becomes the master of the inner kingdom that is, and has always been, the only kingdom that truly belonged to him. The outer kingdom will follow. It always does. The universe has no favorites, but it does have laws, and the law of the disciplined mind is as reliable as the law of gravity and operates with the same impartial faithfulness for every soul who invokes it. There is a light in the struggle that you cannot see while you stand outside it. The man who has never disciplined his mind looks at the disciplined man and imagines a life of grim constraint. But the disciplined man knows that what appears from outside as constraint feels from within like the widest possible freedom. He has escaped the tyranny of his own impulses. He has dethroned the dictator of distraction. He has become, in the truest sense, the author of his own days, rather than the reader of a story written by 1,000 uncoordinated hands. And no one who has ever tasted that freedom has ever willingly returned to the scattered life he came from. I wish I could tell you that this transformation happens quickly. It does not. It happens in the way that all lasting things happen, through the slow accumulation of small, consistent acts, each of which appears in the moment too insignificant to matter. But look back at the end of a year of such acts, and you will not recognize the man who began it. The disciplined mind does not arrive with thunder. It arrives with silence. And one morning you will wake, and you will notice that the noise that used to fill your head has quieted, and that in the stillness there is a voice, your own voice, clearer than it has ever been, speaking to you of the purpose you were born to serve and the life you were meant to build. So I leave you tonight with the question that has guided my own path through every dark hour and every bright one. When was the last time you truly listened to the voice of your definite purpose? When was the last time you sat alone, without the intrusion of any screen or any voice but your own, and asked your deeper self what it required of you in the hour, the day, the year that stands before you? That voice is still there. It has never left. It has only been drowned out by the 1,000 louder voices that demand your attention each day. And it will speak again, with its old clarity and its old authority, the moment you grant it the silence in which to be heard. Discipline your mind, organize your life, not because I have said it, but because every great soul who has ever walked this earth has, in one form of words or another, said the same thing. You are the sovereign of a kingdom that no one else can rule on your behalf. Take up the throne. The work of governance is waiting, and the hours in which to do it are fewer than you think. The candle is low. The night is deep. Somewhere beyond this room, another man is deciding at this very moment whether to begin the work or to postpone it one more day. He will make his choice. You will make yours. And the lives you each build in the years that remain will be the faithful record of the choice you made tonight in the quiet when no one was watching and everything at last depended upon the sovereignty of your own disciplined mind.